So we'll call the meeting to order for the January 30th Board of Education work session for the Hudsonville Public Schools. If I can have a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll move that. Motion
by Mark.
Support.
Support by Ken. All in favor say yes.
Yes.
Any opposed? Agenda approved. First up is our board recognition.
Certainly. So we'd like to recognize our students that not only perform in the classroom, but perform on the athletic surface also. And this surface happens to be water. So this is something that the board is all too used to doing, I would say, at least those who have been here. Our boys water polo team had another successful season. If you remember, our boys water polo team was in the fall for a long time. Then it moved to the winter during COVID, so it was a long break, and then it was back to back. So you've seen some of these gentlemen in the last few months because they were successful in the spring and now. So I would like to turn over to Mr. Farkas, our athletic director, which I don't know where he went. There you are.
Hi, I'm Ben Farkas, I'm the high school athletic director. Appreciate you having us tonight. We were hoping to be there for the regular meeting, I think last Thursday, but many of these gentlemen are involved in the swim team too, and I need that night. So these young men are part of a 4-year dynasty of water polo here at Hudsonville. Having won 4 straight state championships. They're unique, rare, maybe unprecedented, maybe a Jeopardy question in the future because the state water polo association last year decided to move boys water polo to the spring season. Traditionally had been in the fall. And many of these young men were on the team that won the state championship then. And then the Water Polo Association moved it back to the fall this year, and they haven't won the state championship one more time. So back to back in a period of less than 6 months. Obviously pretty impressive in the pool, but equally impressive in the classroom as at least 7 of you have GPAs over 4.0. It's really cool. And have a cumulative GPA. See who it is, right? A cumulative GPA just under 3.6, which is also very impressive as a team. So, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Coach and talk a little bit more about the team in the season.
Yeah, I just like both Dr. Marajek and Ben said. It's kind of crazy that we were able to win 2 state championships in less than 6 months. It's never been done before, and it'll never be done again. We never have to go to the spring season, but I digress. Yeah, these gentlemen worked extremely hard in basically season, and I couldn't be prouder of them as the team they are, the students they are, and the athletes they are. So, yeah, congratulations, guys. Thank you.
We have a list if you could read from, and then President Hooper would like to give a certificate. We can come up here. We get one last team. Not yet. When you get called, Sam, you might be first. It might be a number order. I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, you are first.
We have Sam Lazazo. Nolan Sarver. Tommy Lazazo. Riley McDowell. Tyler Chalmers. Ben Harris. Jack Bradley. Nick Thompson. Cole Jones. Ethan Minus. Dylan Vanderjack. Peyton Moore. Nolan Marks. McCabe Skoltens. Tegan Sorensen. Aiden McDowell. Hunter Smith. Pablo Navas, Ethan Williga, Casey Fields, Cam Pouliot. I'm going too fast. Reed Everts.
Congratulations, gentlemen. The coffee bowl in the back, and the next coffee bowl in the front. Two rows.
Right here. Thank you.
Two different notes. First of all, it's always good to beat your neighbors. But it's an interesting story because in the championship game, it worked out in such a way that these boys played. You would think Jenison would be your neighbor, but Jenison was combined with Granville this year. So not only did they beat Jenison, but they beat Granville in the same game to the state championship. That didn't matter, so it didn't matter. This past Friday night, they were recognized between basketball games with a banner, and the unique banner, as Coach had alluded to, now they have two banners that say State Championship 2022, even though it's just hard to explain. But the two banners are the same, but they are for two different things. So once again, congratulations, gentlemen. Now you can go home. Some of you can comb your hair. Some of you can go over it. Good job, guys. Good job, guys.
All right, next up, we have recognition of visitors and carrying of people present. Robin, Gwen Snoy.
I seem always to be first. Is that like because I'm old?
That's it. You're the only one tonight, Gwen.
Oh! Hey, good evening. At the last meeting, a mom shared her desire for our community to come together to support every child, just like they did at a recent wrestling meet. I agree. But for now, let's sit on the sidelines of wrestling practice with the National Education Association. In match 1, the NEA says that the wrestler who's upset after a loss is just a fragile white boy who can't handle losing. In match number 2, the NEA thinks it's unfair that the farm boy, who does chores twice a day, quickly pins the city boy who lives in an apartment. They both have access to the weight room, but it still isn't fair. In match number 3, a newcomer student who doesn't speak much English uses a few illegal holds and loses the match. The NEA complains it isn't fair because he didn't understand the rules. In match number 4, a wrestler identifies as non-binary. Wrestler B is a Christian. The 2-minute match is intense, but right before the buzzer, wrestler B gets a burst of adrenaline and pins the other wrestler. The NEA contends that the burst of energy that ended the match was fueled by hatred, and wrestler B should be ashamed. These divisive thoughts demonstrate some of the critical theory that the NEA is trying to force on our K-12 students, declaring some kids automatically guilty because of their skin color, their economic status, their religion, or their worldview. If you look, you will see this divisive, hateful warfare, including the hatred of parents, raging in school districts throughout the nation. I'm thankful that critical theory has not permeated our district, but it's making its way into Hudsonville here and there, just like rodents. How can we come back together? We need the board's wisdom and leadership to assure that policy and guidelines unite HPS in focusing on academics, to acknowledge that like weight class, kids are different scholastically, to assure that skin color, sexuality, religion, and family background are respected but not influential, and to hold individual kids, parents, and staff accountable to a set code of conduct. When we focus on our purpose, we have an impartial framework, and we respect each other as individuals, there's no reason we can't give anyone's kid a ride home. Thank you.
All right, first up, we have an action items tonight. Dr. Vanderjagt.
Yeah, so as presented in our last board meeting as discussion, we prepared a resolution for the board for the conversation for tonight. So I can go into it in more detail if you'd like. I know I sent it to you last week. Pat, if you want to add anything, there's really nothing to add other than how it's structured. It is structured as presented tonight to the board. So I don't know if there are additional questions, comments?
The one question I had on Exhibit A that was sent to us, are there three, it looks like there's three different proposals. The one is the operating millage renewal, and then there's for the additional two if necessary, correct? That's not presented as one.
Correct. You're taking one resolution for the three items.
Right.
You don't have to take three. There are not three resolutions. There are one resolution for the three items. Correct.
Right,
Yep.
but on the ballot, there will be three proposals.
That is correct.
That is
Yep.
okay. All right, can I have a motion to approve the operating millage renewal, the operating millage, and the sinking fund millage?
So moved.
Motion by Ken, second by Andrew. Any further discussion?
No, that was Nick.
Oh, Nick, I'm sorry, Nick.
Hard to distinguish.
And I don't know if this is where I enter in with I have a counter proposal or something that I would like to have the board consider. I don't know
Okay.
if this is when
Okay, so you want to make an amendment to the motion?
yes.
Okay. And your amendment is?
My amendment to the motion would be that we wait a year and we go one more year with just 1 year proposal. And then after that, we look at the results, we look at the state of the district, and then at that point, I would recommend that we go to a 5-year. I'm a little bit torn by this because on the one hand, I think Pat presented a very logical and persuasive argument when it came for us going every 5 years instead of every year. And the biggest thing that persuaded me from that perspective was the amount of money that it could save us as a district. However, I've heard from several people over the last week who are concerned about the fact that this is one of their opportunities to push back against anything that may be going on within the district. And right now, there are a lot of things going on within the district. And as we work to settle these things down and get to a point where people are not questioning everything that goes on, but are saying, you know what, I have some trust in what's going on with the board, and if they tell us that, if they recommend something, that I'm going to be more willing to support that than perhaps in today's environment right now. Now, I also, because data is important, I looked at some votes over the last several years on the Addo County website, and I made some copies of that, and I'd like to pass those around for people to look at so they can know why I'm doing this. I think data is a big thing. I also think listening to the voters and then responding, whether we agree or disagree with what they're telling us, is very important. And I know from a personal perspective, a couple of times last year, I brought things up to the board, and when I was sitting out in the crowd, and it seemed like those were not even looked at, okay? I mean, if someone says to me, you know, Greg, I've looked at what you have to say, and it makes no sense to me because of this, this, and this, I can live with that. But just saying, discounting something, and not just myself, but other people, just discounting it and going on is not appropriate. And so I want to make sure that we're having discussions about what we're doing, and that the voters and the people can see why we're doing things. So the spreadsheet in front of you is very simple. It's got the last 10 years of millage operating renewal, and then it's got the vote. And last year was 57 to 43. Most of the votes are in the 70s. A couple were in the 60s, the closest being 61%. So you can see those numbers right there. The next column has the total votes that were cast in that millage election, anywhere from as low as 1,200 votes to as high as 8,300 votes. And in going back in those years, I'm not aware of any other issues that were driving 8,300 people coming out to vote as opposed to 1,200 people coming out to vote, or 2,100 people coming out to vote. The next column has the difference between winning and losing in that particular year. Last year with a 57-43% vote, the difference between the millage carrying and losing was 784 votes. Obviously, the more voters you have, that number's going to change, but I looked at that from the beginning. One of the things that stood out to me, and that was, I won't use the word alarming, but was concerning to me, was in 2018. In 2018, the regular millage passed 73 to 27. Okay, that's a pretty significant margin. And that was based on 2,700 votes, okay? But when I look at the sinking fund vote for that same year, the same electorate that gave us a 73 to 27 yes vote, that same electorate said 54 to 46, or on the sinking fund vote, or 215 votes could have changed that from a win to a loss. And then I looked at 2013 when we had another sinking fund vote. It wasn't as dramatic, but there was an 8% change in the number of people that voted for the renewal at 77% and the sinking fund at 69%. So right now, and I think Dr. Vanderjack alluded to this at our last meeting, when he was talking about it's kind of hard to explain to people what we're trying to do here with these millage votes. And if you can't explain something in 30 seconds, okay, you've lost a lot of people's attention. All we need is one or two groups or individuals to all of a sudden decide that they're going to take up the mantle of trying to get a negative vote, and we could lose 3 votes. Okay, we've got 3 votes coming up. What I'm suggesting is, why don't we go and take the 1 year, one more time, because we've done it for 20-some years. Take it one more time, see what happens, and then the next year, if we decide we can come back on the 5-year deal where it's only going to include 1 vote in that next year. So that if we do have some opposition and it goes down, we're not losing 2 or 3 a millage renewal vote and a sinking fund at the same time. That's why I'm advocating that we do this.
Okay, additional discussion?
Yeah, there have been 3 things that have taken place in the last year or so that have concerned me that we have never really discussed at the board level. I think we've been too dismissive of these issues. One would be the non-homestead millage vote, which you're talking about here, I believe, Craig.
Yes.
Which was a very slim majority. We passed that by. The other was the drop in student enrollment for this school year, and we've never discussed the significance of that and why that happened. And the third issue was the change in the board and the election this year. It's quite dramatic and unusual to have a board member not seated again when they've been on the board. So, in discussing this whole issue, I want us to be in touch with the public, because they're the ones who have to approve. And I'd like the board to at least give some thought to why these three things have happened before we move ahead and have some other problems.
So, new guy here.
Sure.
Several of you have a lot of experience. I mean, I think, Pat, you mentioned we've done the 1 year for 27 years or so, and several of you have been on for a good chunk of that. Has the discussion of 1 versus 5 come up often? Is there a reason why we've always stuck with 1 versus 5? Because again, as it was presented last week, it makes all the sense in the world to me to go to 5 for a variety of reasons, not the least of which I think it'd be catastrophic if we ever didn't pass this for our students. So that was in my mind all week, why we've continually done 1 for 27 straight years.
In my recollection on the board, and I may have missed something, but in my recollection, it was just never broached. I don't recall Nick Sigleric, nor do I recall Roxanne DeWeerd ever broaching the topic. Now, I may be wrong, others may recall better, so I won't, say that's fact, because that's just my recollection. So I recall in discussions with Dr. Vanderjack early on in his time here that some very preliminary discussions around a lot of other districts don't do 1, they do 5, they do 10, they do 7, things like that. So it kind of got brought up a couple of years ago under Dr. Vanderjack. But it was just never, it was just sort of like you did 1 year every year, and we never really broached the topic in my recollection. So
yeah, the first time I heard it come up was a response to the poor election we had for the last non-homestead vote. When we heard the result of that, then it was suggested at that meeting that perhaps we should go to a 5-year vote. I'm technically not opposed to a 5-year vote. I'm just concerned that we not jeopardize ourselves by making the public think we're trying to not get their input. I think that we did get input from the public on that vote, as we did in the other 2 votes that I mentioned here. And I think we need to be sensitive to the input of the public on this. That's why I tend to favor Greg's suggestion here that we go for a 1 year now, and then next year consider going to a 5-year, which is a nice compromise between just going to a 5-year right now and not sending a negative message to the public.
yeah, and a couple of other things. I mean, we have had percentage vote drops like that in the past. A reminder, it is helpful to get information prior to the meeting so we can see it and digest it. That's always beneficial. So I'll just add that. But we have had percentage vote drops. Another thing to keep in mind is between 21 and 22, there was after years of increase, there was a significant drop in absentee votes as a percentage of the total vote. So that's something to keep in mind. My opinion is that I respect what Mr. Davis is saying. I see these as 3 separate things. Those situations driven by some overlap, by also differences. This community has always been very positive toward public education support, and I believe that will continue to do so, not to be dismissive of some of the concerns within the community, and I think we have responded to some of those through book guidelines and other activities we have taken, but I see them as separate with some overlap, but we can also discount the absentee ballot drop that was also played into this situation, in my opinion. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah, and as far as, I mean, it's a pretty simple spreadsheet, so it's not something that would take a whole lot of time to get, but the thing that really got me, Ken, was when I looked, today when I looked at these numbers, this was the first time I looked at the sinking funds.
Mm-hmm.
And when I saw that difference of 73% approval for renewal and 54 for sinking, I thought to myself, that doesn't look good. I mean, that's, and I couldn't get any more information today. I tried to call Pat, he was on vacation, so I wasn't able to talk to him. But it sounds to me like, from what everybody's saying here, this really isn't a golden thing that we really need to do this year, since we've gone 27 years in a row. So I'm just proposing that we wait 360 days.
Yeah. And I respect that proposal, I do. What I struggle with a little bit is the notion that there are these overweighing problems within the district.
Mhm.
I don't accept that. And I respect your opinion, we're all entitled to our opinion. I just don't see these overweighing, in fact, the data points to a high-performing district. And again, I think the practices that have been put in place in response to public concern, be it work sessions that have been opened up again, be it, again, book guidelines, be it a lot of things. I just don't, I'm not necessarily opposed to the 1 year and then 5 years, so long as the motion states that it will be 1 and 5.
Mhm.
We don't lose that 5 year. But I do take exception to there's these overwhelming problems within the district, which is sort of the underlying discussion around this. That's what I struggle with. I just don't agree with that.
And I will say that I will not rescind those comments. I believe
Fine.
that there are many underlying issues going on here, and they're gonna be dealt with, and they will be dealt with. And so we have a difference on that.
Yes, we do.
You know, and I've talked to a lot of people over the last year who I've never talked to before, many of whom agreed with me, some of whom didn't, all offered counsel on the way to go. And I mean, I'm one of the reasons why, the reason I'm sitting here is because there were issues. And so,
Again,
anyway.
I don't dispute your perspective.
Right.
I just disagree with you.
And neither do I yours, you know what I mean?
We can move on.
I think we can all agree that it is critical to the functioning of this district and all the students that both the sinking fund and the non-homestead renewal are passed. If they don't pass, it is not good, and it's critical that they pass. So we have a motion on the table, an amendment, so please correct me if I get it wrong. The amendment is to approve the operating millage renewal for 1 year and to approve the sinking fund millage for 5 years.
Yes.
Do I have your amendment correct?
Yes.
Just to clarify, is the amendment to approve it for 1 year and then go to a 5 year, or just do 1 year? And my point of clarification is, do we run the risk then of another year next year and another year? If that motion is not passed with a 5 year contingent in there, then we run the risk of year after year after year. The issues aren't solved, we have to go another year, we get another year. So,
Do you want?
can we add a 1 and a 5?
Do you want your motion to be, operating millage renewal for 1 year for 2023, and beginning in 2024, we have an operating millage every 5 years, and a sinking fund millage for 5 years in 2023?
May I ask a question?
Can we first find out from Pat whether that's even, or Doug, whether that's even possible?
It is not. You have to take a resolution for the current ballot.
Okay. Okay, so,
One of the things that I make a comment on is I think it's a very dangerous precedent for us to use our voting millages and sinking fund as a litmus test. I understand that our public has a right to vote however they want and for whatever reason they want. But if we are saying that our votes on the operating millage and the sinking fund millage are tied to our thoughts about a particular board or about a particular issue versus the district as a whole, I think that sets a very dangerous precedent.
I would agree with you, Dawn. Unfortunately, we don't control how people vote or why they vote. So, correct me if I'm wrong, so we first have to take a vote on the motion.
You would need a second for the motion, and then,
For the
amendment.
For the amendment.
in
Okay.
full transparency, we do not have a resolution fee tonight, then, so we'd have to schedule another board meeting
Okay,
before the
okay,
SO.A.R.
okay.
I think
The resolution that we have prepared based on our last meeting does not cover the amendment, so we'd have to have another board meeting.
I think, as Dr. Vanderjack saying, we actually have to get it to the Board of Canvassers. They actually have to act on the language.
Yep.
So I think we have to have this redrafted, and would that be a special Friday?
It'd have to be before this, it can't be this, I don't know when you do it, it might be
Sunday by the 7th.
Sunday night, I don't know, I gotta look at the calendar to see if we can get a quorum.
So we have to deal with what's at hand here, and then we deal with the other issues. So the first issue is we vote on the current resolution that's here, correct?
You have a motion on the
Or
table.
do I vote on the
Motion on the
motion?
table. Yeah,
Okay.
there's a motion in the
You need a
second.
second.
So there's a motion on the table. Need a second.
The motion is for,
For
1 year,
renewal,
5 years.
a 1-year operating millage renewal and a sinking fund millage for 5 years. As written, as what we've been doing. So we have an operating millage renewal for 1 year,
that's the non-homestead.
the non-homestead. Non-homestead operating millage renewal for 1 year and a sinking fund millage for 5 years. That was the motion that Greg made.
That was the motion I made that Dr. Vanderjack said we'd have to have another meeting.
We don't have, but you're taking the motion to, basically you're best off, in my opinion. You have the recommendation, you have a first and a second, you vote. If it does not pass, then you're
Then we
taking the
vote.
amendment, and then you'd
Okay.
have to have another board amendment meeting with the
Okay.
amendment at that point.
So we're gonna first vote on what was presented to us in our agenda. I'm sorry, different places do Robert rules a little bit different, so.
Could I ask this question, Barb? If, at the present time, the present process is every year voting for the renewal,
Non-homestead,
non-homestead, and every 5 years for the sinking fund,
yes.
if we vote down the going to 5 years, doesn't it automatically stay?
It does not. It's a resolution. So every year, we have to take the same
Okay,
resolution. So it's a
okay.
resolution.
thank you.
It does not just default.
Okay.
Okay. So we are going to vote on the resolution that was presented in our board package, which was the following: the non-homestead operating millage renewal, the operating millage, which was the additional 2 mills, and the 5-year sinking fund millage. And we're gonna do a roll call. We'll go alphabetical order. Nick Bullhouse,
Vote to approve it.
Greg Chansky,
Okay, now, I'm a little slow here, okay, so,
so we're gonna vote on this.
okay,
If
well,
it passes, then we don't do his amendment.
okay. So, if I vote against it, that means that I'm going with my proposal.
Correct,
And you-
correct.
or
Well,
you
we
can
would
vote
put that one as a motion
And
forward.
you
Okay.
make a motion. You make a motion.
Okay, so we'll start over again. Nick Bullhouse,
I vote to approve as written.
Greg Chansky,
No,
Mark Davis,
I vote no.
Andrew DeWitt,
Yes.
Ken Hall,
Yes.
Barb Hooper is a no, and Dawn Sneed.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so the motion that was presented is passed. All right. Next up, discussion items, fire trip request.
So we have a request from our required kids who have not been able to do this based on COVID for a long time to go back to New York City. Spend a few days there. You see the trip request in front of you. Deb Andre has reached out to the kids to try to gather the interest. I would say it's a lot of interest to head that way. You saw their musical performances while they performed, but you also saw the shows that they would like to go to. Those are some pretty big shows, so we'll kind of see what happens with that. But this is the request. Because it is out of state overnight, for those new board members, we asked the board for approval on any out of state overnight trip. I know Greg and we talked a little bit about that, so this is the request before you. I think it's a great opportunity. I know as a son in the choir program, it financially might not be in my best interest, but that is my recommendation to the board. If it's not something you vote on, we will put it in the consent agenda at the next board meeting. But I want to make sure you have a chance to look through all the details prior. If you have any questions about it, Mrs. Andre is certainly available, as am I, and also probably any student in the choir program that would like to go. Any questions
Any
regarding?
questions on the fire trip?
I appreciate the fact that she said there is a small scholarship, because one of the
Yeah.
things when I look at numbers like this, there are so many kids that would love to go, and I would hate to see someone not be able to. So I guess just encouraging her, whatever they can do to continue to build that fund, and allow for some really good opportunities for fundraising for students.
And it's a little bit tight. Normally, we would ask for this in the fall because of the transportation and trying to get that secure is a little bit harder to do. So it's a little crunch time for the kids, but look at after and get some fundraising and some scholarships.
Great opportunity for them. Any other questions? All right, we'll move on to the Diversity Advocacy Committee update.
Yeah, so I'm going to turn this over to Mandy. She's done a great job being the co-chair of that committee and bringing us through. And I know we've had a couple meetings. We haven't been able to update the board, so I've sent some information via board briefs. But asking for a quick update on how the committee is rolling and go from there. Mandy?
Yeah, so in our December meeting, the committee spent some time really at the ending stage of our first phase of really just trying to identify a problem, a practice statement, and that's just meant to be what's sort of an ending point to say what is the issue that we're trying to address and solve and better understand the context around. And so in that December meeting, the group identified the way in which consensus would be determined through a voting procedure just to determine to what degree are we looking for consensus, knowing that every group uses a different criteria, such as just finding a majority to all the way to finding unanimous. And so the group landed on what that consensus decision point would be, and then we used all of the information that we had discussed in prior meetings to craft a statement to convey where we want to dig in further. And so I know that this was shared in previous communication, but just for clarity, that statement is that discrimination and harassment based on race, religion, disability, and sexual orientation is occurring at HPS. The Diversity and Advocacy Committee acknowledges that instances of discrimination and harassment are not limited to these protected groups. Our laws and policies require HPS to create an anti-harassment learning environment for all. With this as our starting point, how can we better collect data, implement proactive measures, and continually monitor and improve? We really felt like these action steps at the end of that statement point into what we hope to dive into further in these next phases of the committee work. As we move into this next phase of our committee work is to explore the context. And so during our January meeting, we really took the time to identify who are all the various stakeholder groups that will feel invested in this conversation and whose input is really important to hear. And so we identified over 20 different subgroups that we feel are important to hear from, and we started to brainstorm what are the questions and what are the pieces of information that we feel are important to gather in this process, and what might be the best ways to collect that information. We just started the how part of that at the ending of our meeting in January, and so with our next meeting coming up next month, we'll dig into that further to develop an action plan to gather that contextual information. So this is sort of our phase 2 of the process, with the hope and goal of leading to being able to, at the end, bring us recommendations to the board and our administrative team with what we find. This is a group that really, and by design, has really diversity of thought and perspective. And what I have really appreciated about this group is that we've established a set of norms that we want to work from during our time together. And part of that is just listening to understand each other's perspective and make sure that that dialogue remains respectful, knowing that we all have different viewpoints on these issues. And I feel like those have been honored in the group process, and we look forward to putting that together in a couple weeks. Any questions for me?
How's the committee been? Pretty stable, or a lot of turnover in the committee? Can you speak to that, Mandy?
Yeah, this fall we had 3 members that needed to take a step back, and so we've introduced 3 new. We've used the same member selection criteria that we have since the beginning, which is really to support that range of people from various locations within the district, their role within the district, how they're associated, whether they're a parent or staff member, and then also looking at original survey responses to make sure that how different members, their feedback on that survey is representative, proportionate to what the overall stakeholder group has said during that initial culture and climate survey that we did over a year ago.
How many people are on the committee?
22.
22.
And just as a reminder, I know we've talked about this, but how are the positions filled on the committee? Let's say that, when somebody leaves and
Yeah. So, for example, we had a member that needed to step back that was a parent of students attending Georgetown and had indicated a certain way on the certain questions of the climate survey. So specifically to capture that diversity in thinking, we looked at what was the overall percentage of parents who responded that having students learn about cultural differences was important to them. We know that a certain percentage supported that, a certain percentage didn't. And then looking at, has it been your experience that your child has been insulted, teased, or harassed based on individual differences? And knowing that people respond differently. So for the outgoing member, we just look to see how can we best replicate those same factors of selection in whoever the incoming member is, so that they could sort of serve as that representative from the person that was leaving.
Okay.
Probably explain that in a really.
No, I've got it. No, good, thank you.
Mandy, you just talked about how a member was replaced. How were members selected to begin with? I mean, like, how many parents, how many educators, how was that determined?
So at the beginning, we had initially just put out a survey, who was interested in being a part of this committee. I want to say that we had well over 100 parents indicate that they were interested. And so we wanted of the parent representatives for that to have some from the north side, some from the south side, some that were, you know, if 40% of the parent survey said, yes, we want our students to experience learning opportunities to understand cultural differences. We wanted 40% of the parent representatives to have aligned with that thinking so that they could share that viewpoint in the committee structure. So from those that were interested, we looked to identify, can we find individuals that would fit those various characteristics to make sure we had a well-rounded committee. And so that same process was used for both parents as well as staff members.
How long has the committee been in?
Yeah, since last January. We did take a break over the summer, but it started a year ago.
What would you say is the biggest accomplishment of this committee over the last year?
Yeah, I think that our landing spot in December was actually that success, because even coming into that space of being ready to share different viewpoints on what do we consider to be an issue, how do we interpret this law or policy, knowing what the laws and policies are around issues like this, understanding what data points. And so we spent a lot of time, I think, to be able to have shared knowledge and understanding of the issue before moving into how can we best identify what is the issue that we're trying to address. So I'm really actually, I feel like it's a huge accomplishment to get to a place to say, knowing that this is a committee with very varying beliefs, perspectives, experiences, to come together to say this is, that we have consensus that this is our problem of practice statement, I think is a success.
Okay, so it sounds to me like from a process standpoint, the diversity committee internally seems to be satisfied with what they're doing, but what external impact have they had? What's the biggest external impact that the committee has had in meeting for a year on the district, on the education of the students and those types of things?
Yeah, I think we've actually been very cautious to try to move towards external action without first having a united sense of what it is that we're trying to accomplish. So I think initially, because this topic is so, there's so many different viewpoints on this, that I think a very quick reaction is to say, well then what action steps do we want to move forward? Because I think everyone kind of comes to the table with their sort of experiences and perspectives kind of guiding them what they think that the solution is or is not. And so before we jump to that stage, I think it was really important for us to be able to, are we internally set before we are externally focused? So I think that we are really trying to be cautious and careful before moving into brainstorming solutions to make sure that we're all talking about what are we trying to solve initially. So that was intentional. I think that this next stage of understanding context is equally important for us to acknowledge that we know that there are a wide variety of opinions on what should come next, and so I think that we're trying to be intentional to make sure that we do hear from a broad scope of stakeholder groups. So for example, we named everything from recent alumni to experts in the field of mental health to parents of current students, and also just residents of Hudsonville that feel invested in this topic. So I think that we've tried to be very thorough in making sure we do hear everybody's perspective on the committee, knowing that we're all coming from this different viewpoints.
Is there anything from an external standpoint, no matter how small it may be, anything that's been done, or has it all been internal?
I think to support a communication loop, so our meeting notes specific to May and September that have been published on the website do speak to data that I don't know that all was publicly known. Also, what are the important laws and policies that are pertinent to this conversation? So there has been that loop to say, what are we even discussing, to make sure that there's an acknowledgement there. But that has not been for the purpose of saying, and therefore we're going to do X. It has really just been to be transparent with what the conversation has been about.
Okay. When do you expect that you're going to start to have some kind of an external impact on the operation of the district?
Our timeline document has like a projected timeline of being able to come to the with some initial recommendations yet this spring, but we've also had some conversations as a committee to say however long this committee needs in stage 2 and stage 3 is how long we should take, because I think that it is important that we know and understand that whatever the recommended action steps will be supported by the board, and we're able to digest that as far as actionable steps as an administrative team as well. So part of our purpose in kind of providing these monthly updates too is to keep you abreast of where our conversation may be leading, but really wanting to be sure that we have the support before any steps are taken.
At one point in time, Dr. Vanderjack, we had a representative from the board on the committee.
We had invited the board. I think
Okay.
nobody attended.
Okay. How does one get invited?
I believe I reached out to the board.
Okay,
Said if
so
you'd
I
like
just
to.
would contact, would I
At one
contact
point,
you?
Chad was.
Chad said he would attend. He was the only one that said he would. I reached out to the board. If you guys would attend, you're
Okay.
welcome to.
Okay, so could I get a list of the meetings and then just let you know that I'll be stopping in just to observe?
That would be great.
Okay. Now, is there anywhere on the district website where notes of meetings or anything like that are?
Yeah,
there?
we did have a little bit of a lapse just because our process has been to make sure that the update first comes to these work sessions before the meeting minutes are posted. But following this meeting, we'll be updating that, and it is, I think it's under the strategic plan tab where you can find previous notes.
Okay, thank you. Then I will be, should I, Dr. Vanderjack, should I contact Mandy? Should I contact Amy? Should I contact you or is this
To get
request?
to the website or to get to the
No,
meeting?
has to go to a meeting.
Yeah, you can, either one of us.
Okay,
Fine.
okay, thank
Yeah,
you.
you'll see in board briefs every week, it tells you when we're about to meet. We can send them.
Sure. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Mandy on the Diversity Advocacy Committee update?
Thank you.
Thank you. Moving ahead to policy 2210, curriculum development approved courses.
Sure, so our process for policy development is traditionally to take policies to the board in a work session and then bring that to the board for a first reading and then a second reading. So this is the discussion of a policy that was on for a first reading a month ago, but after discussion between Mrs. Taylor and myself, I felt we needed to bring this to the board because there's some discussion regarding the difference between courses and books, adopted textbooks. So, and then the question came deeper into how do you define a course? So what we did is we went all the way back to square one and said, oh, here is the draft policy that Neola normally would send you that has all the options on it. So the board can see all the options. And what we did is we looked at our policy, which we've made I wouldn't say major change, one change, and I'll allude to that in a minute. And then the rest of it follows suit. And I have a couple questions for the board to consider tonight so that we can bring it back with any recommendations that you have for a first reading. Again, for those that are new, we could have a first reading, second reading, we could scrap it and start over, we could go to a third reading, but policy is extremely important to what the board says. So I want to make sure that this meets the needs of what the board would expect when it comes to the approved, what we call courses. And the question is, what is the difference between a course and potentially a class or curriculum? So I just want to make sure that you understand the difference between all of them. So if you look at this, policy, it's 2210. Our current policy, if you would read through, basically has option A. So I'm going to read that. It says, for purposes of this policy and consistent communication throughout the district, curriculum shall be defined as the courses of study, subjects, classes, and organized activities provided by the school. Period. We are recommending to add C also into that conversation. And primarily is because if you look at C, it adds in there about individuals and groups of students expressed in terms of specific instructional objectives or class periods. So it just expands that definition a little bit that we think covers all approved courses. You'll look at B, D, and E. Some of them overlap. Some of them say the same things and different. Some are connected. But A and C cover what we feel, in open to discussion with the board, what we as I would say Amy, myself, and our administrative team feel covers what is described as curriculum for the district. The rest of that, I'll quickly go through, and then I really want us to focus on that top half, because that's truly the definition I think that the board, we need to embrace. And whatever we embrace, that's what we need to discuss. But the bottom half just goes through some other components. We very well might want to discuss this policy in the future. Should we, we've talked a lot about alternate pathways to graduation as an example. We have a graduation policy. However, this might intertwine with that, so we might have to come back in a year or two if we have alternate pathways to graduation. But at this point, the second component follows line with what we currently do. I do have a question on the second page. There's some red areas you will see. The one that says the superintendent shall make progress reports to the board currently says annually. There's a thought of doing it periodically because if things change. They changed quickly during COVID. I don't know how much they change now, but periodically could be twice a year, could be once every 2 years. It all depends on when there's a notion to do that. The annually does put it into a notion of we're doing this again. We haven't changed anything. Why are we doing this? And looking at a couple of the districts, most of them use periodically. Just food for thought. And then the last two selections at the bottom are not chosen. But those are options that we could choose if you'd like to. So if there's not a checkbox in it, it would not be included in the first reading that you bring to the board. If there is, then that would be cleaned up and it would be a first reading. We can always deviate from the policy to put our own language in there, but then we run the risk of not having the legal support behind the policy, which currently the board would have if you choose any of these options on here. If
You want
that
to
makes
move
sense.
from annually to periodically or vice versa?
I want to move to periodically. Only because I don't know if that means twice a year. It's selected as annually,
Yeah.
but periodically could be every
You
couple
want
of
to move
years.
to periodically.
Yeah, maybe I said that wrong. Sorry.
Okay. No, I probably said it right. I just missed it.
So one of the questions that came up a lot in the last couple of years was the whole word pilot. And in addressing what a pilot is that part of what this policy would deal with, or is there another policy that would address, because, and I'll tell you where I'm looking, towards the second page, partway down, it says, the superintendent may conduct such innovative programs as are deemed to be necessary to the continuing growth of the instructional program and to better ensure accomplishment of the district's educational goals. And in my head, that would encompass something like what we did with Ruler. That it was an innovative program. It was to support the S.O.A.R for goals that the board had put in place. But is there a way that we can maybe assure people what we mean by pilot, since that seemed to be a question? And is this the right policy to do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think traditionally, we've used pilot programming when we're seeking to gain a better understanding of the program to see if it meets our needs before we ask the board for formal approval. We've had pilot programs that have run six years, I think. Before I got here, it started as a pilot program. It's still going on. Why, I don't know. We'll discuss that in a little bit when we get to it. But so I think to that point, we try to find the correct product to use or program or curriculum to use. We want to pilot it. And sometimes we need additional time to look at data and go from there. So I think this is the right policy. But it doesn't, there's no time frame of a pilot program is defined as 2 weeks, 3 months, 2 years, to that point. Our job is to keep you as a board informed on what pilot programs we are using to determine whether or not that's the best course of action.
There is an internal curriculum review process that we use, which we used and are kind of in the process of using as we're piloting the SEL Ruler curriculum. And I can reshare that just as a frame of reference. That's not as necessarily connected to board policy as it is just a review process of what information is reviewed early on with teachers and administrators who come together to help make some of those decisions about what is driving us to change. Is our student data suggesting we might need to consider a change of curriculum resource? Are our teachers saying that? So there's a whole curriculum review internal process that is coming to my mind, Dawn, that isn't necessarily connected to board policy, but I can certainly pass that along to you just for frame of reference as far as how we walk through that, which does have the final phase of that is evaluation and continued monitoring and such.
And so approval of a piloted program is what would really fall under this policy then?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And I think most of this really wanted to clear up the difference between curriculum and a course.
Right.
Because the confusion was, if you approve a course, are you approving the curriculum? And we want to make sure it covered both. That's why we want to add the additional language in there for C.
So C, so right now it reads as just A, we're saying we want to add C.
That's correct.
And so that I understand correctly, what you're saying, something like Ruler, a pilot, it would still come before the board first before it wouldn't
For
just
final.
for final.
Mm-hmm.
But the pilot could start under the direction of the superintendent.
Yeah, we have, you see that a lot, and we want to try it. STEAM curriculum is another perfect example, right? We started working with STEAM curriculum well before I think it went to the board to approve a specific curriculum, because it changes quickly. It's innovative. Like, hey, we want to try this. You have teachers that do some innovative things in their classrooms. It doesn't really, and to us, it's defined as curriculum. It's not a course. So we look at Ruler as an example. It is a curriculum. It's not a course. So we want to include it in this so that it does need board approval, the curriculum and the course, if that makes sense. Sorry.
Thanks, appreciate it.
It is confusing. That's why we're trying to clean up.
And this goes back to that whole list that we had looked at of
That's
some
correct.
things we wanted to do online, but because we didn't have specific dates of approval, and then, again, some of that was
Well,
a
I
little
think
confusing. Yes.
even Mr. Davis had made a comment that we've approved these before, and we're like, we don't have record of it. So we wanted to try to, before we brought that list back to you, like, we gotta get this policy straight first, so we know what truly needs to be approved and what doesn't. Because we gave you a list with a lot of empty spots, and it was like, hold on, that's not a good thing.
Yeah, I think this is a good policy. Sorry, you have a question?
Yeah, in the recent approval of the course on World War I, World War II. We approved the course.
We did.
Did we approve the curriculum?
The
Yes.
curriculum was part of that. That was the textbooks that you reviewed.
You approve them both. Normally, that's what we would do. There's just been a lot of gray area in the last, I don't know, about 10 years. I don't know. I just know that we won. It's our job to try to clean it up. How's that?
So if we approve a course, can the curriculum change without us knowing it?
No. So an example might be right now we are I have an elementary math group that is doing some learning around math in anticipation of a curriculum review, but we're doing some best practice research right now. And so once we have narrowed that down, once we get to that point of setting a vision for math and identifying some potential options, then you would be informed through a work session of here's what this math committee is recommending and where we're at in this process. And then the board would have to approve that content. We're currently using a math expressions, and if we change that curriculum at the elementary, then the board would have
So
to approve.
course, curriculum, and then where do books fall?
That's a whole different policy.
It depends on what the use of the book is for.
I understand.
Yeah.
Well, in textbooks, it's a different policy.
I understand.
Yeah.
I understand.
Any other questions for, Amy? All right, so Dr. Vanderjagt will see
Just real
this.
quick, what is a Carnegie unit?
A Carnegie unit is a measure of time that is sometimes used to identify whether a student has mastered learning during a period of time. And so a Carnegie unit is something that we could consider in the future. Right now, we focus on courses, if you will, covering standards and measuring progress at the end of that course, which does
So
have a
it's butts and
time
seats for a
unit
certain
to
amount
it.
of time.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Okay.
Maybe I give you a good example of this. In my former district, they had an alternative ed program. In that alternative ed program, it was not based on how many hours you were there for a semester or a trimester. It was how many, once you accomplished that packet, you received credit for Algebra 1. You connect next packet, Algebra 2. It didn't matter if you were there for a semester, trimester. So there was a deviation for an alternate pathway to graduation that deviated from the Carnegie unit. If that were something this board would explore in the next year, 2 years, 5 years, that's one of these policies we bring back to the board and say we'd like to add this because of X, Y, and Z. Right now, all of our students get credit for time spent in a class over a period of time.
It's a lot of it's looking at competency-based education. It's getting very big at the university level that you don't necessarily do a semester. You give a student instruction once they have verified that they're competent, they can move on. So there are some universities here in the United States that are completely competency-based. It's a different way of doing education. So.
One other question. Board directs that the curriculum of the district, let me see, incorporate state recommended performance standards for students as a basis of determining how to live. So my point is, Ms. Taylor, the state recommended versus district recommended. I think what I'm asking. It's on page one. Sorry, page one. Page one, second E, the second E down there.
Second from the bottom.
Yeah. And so my point is, would there, the difference between state, or not the difference between, the distinction between state and district recommended performance standards. You know what, I'm not sure what I'm formulating my question. I got a question in there, but I'm not putting it clearly. So rather than waste the board's time, let's move on and I'll give
Okay.
and send the question to the board as a whole.
Okay.
Can I maybe address that to a little bit, Mr.
You
Hall?
know what my question is.
I know.
Maybe you can help me.
I know, but let me help you ask your question. No, I'm just kidding. I think if you're looking at E, we believe that our teachers are the experts in assessing students based on their understanding of state objectives and how that plays a role into their curriculum, into their instruction, that they should be the ones assessing based on what their interpretation of what those state.
I guess where I'm
standards are.
going, thank you, I guess where I'm going is, and again, I'll formulate the question separately to it, but what if our district standards are higher than the state? Would we have that situation, would we want that situation?
I think they are right now. I would argue that our standards for our teachers are higher than what the state would expect us to
Okay.
be.
But, okay, got it.
So Dr. Vanderjack, this will come as a first reading at our board meeting?
Yeah, and I would encourage, board, if you have questions, please reach out so that we can bring you what you would expect as a first reading. I don't want, I mean, if we don't have to, I mean, don't hesitate, you want to call, stop by, email, just let us know. We can sit down and talk through things. You have questions, I would love to address them prior to, so that we can talk about it as a board, but I can give the right reading to you at the first reading.
Yeah, on page 2, Doug, are you going to define periodically for us?
Do you want me to?
Well, it's checked annually here.
Yeah.
So you're going to go with periodically?
I don't know. That's a board, that's up to you as a board. I don't know if I can define periodically.
Okay.
That's, I mean, I'm open to that discussion, say, to me, the only thing that annually, if we miss it, I don't want somebody to say, you didn't do it last year. I mean, it hasn't been done in 6 years, and it's been on your policies annually. So I don't want to get caught behind, but I also would expect somebody to say, hey, we haven't seen this in a while. So I don't know how to answer that question, sorry.
So periodically could be shorter or longer?
Yeah, yeah. It could be every 3 months because we have a lot of changes. It could be every 3 years because
All right.
we haven't had any changes. So I
think that language would be nice when there are changes. You know?
Yeah.
Periodically doesn't, or annually doesn't mean anything unless there are changes. The significance would be if there are changes when the board should probably know about it.
So
I don't know if that language can be included there or not.
we can put periodically as deemed necessary by, that's what I'm trying to,
Well, significant changes, I think, on
Yeah.
legalistic about it, if there's significant changes, that would be the issue to me. If we have significant changes, then never important. We don't need, commas and periods, but significant changes.
let me work on some language and then I'll send it out. You'll get it before the next reading. Please just let me know.
I have an idea as well, and it's connected to the next document that I'm gonna go over, that maybe it just becomes an annual thing as connected to when I do bring courses for review.
Mhm.
If I bring courses for review, if it's, right? So that might be
So
something we
Should
should
we
consider.
move to the next agenda item, the textbook curriculum timeline?
If you want me to.
Absolutely.
Okay, so this is a document that has been in place, kind of some process and procedures. These are just internal procedures and processes that I use to allow me to communicate clearly with department chairs and administrators around timelines. It also allows for really equitable use of financial resources. So you'll notice that there are 2 parts to this. One is a textbook or curriculum approval procedure and timelines for when the board can expect and when all of the key players in making decisions can expect things to be moved through a process. And then the second page you'll notice is a course approvals procedure. The textbook curriculum approval procedure has been modified, as you'll see on that first page of attachment 4. In red, I've done some strike through and really looking to do some changes, not needing the second reading of a particular textbook or curriculum, but we certainly may. And so that would just allow more time at the front end for me to work with those stakeholder groups for recommendations and such, and still then have board approval in a timely manner so that we can get items ordered and in teachers' hands prior to summer is the goal for that. So that's specific to textbook and curriculum approval procedures, and just an internal modification that I wanted to bring to your attention and get any of your thinking on. And then the second page is really around the course approvals, and this is my connection to the conversation we were just having. This is beginning for implementation in the fall because as Mr. Davis shared, we did have a course approval earlier this year, and I have some before you this evening as well, and I'll share the why behind that in a moment. But this timeline is laid out to give you an example of what that might look like. Again, moving from 1 reading to 2 reading, just for some of those timing perspectives. But it makes me wonder if each year during that course approval procedure, that could be the internal procedure that we would share that list connected to the board policy we just reviewed. So it could be, we would like to add a World at War course. During that same time, we are presenting to you as a board a review of the previous courses, knowing that in this case, World at War would be added as a course based on the approval that you did in December as a board. Does that make sense? So it would just be annually if I'm bringing a course, but then if I wasn't going to be modifying that, any request, and the board wasn't going to be approving any course that would modify the list would just carry over from year to year.
Yeah, that also allows us to see that course in the context of
The other offerings.
The other offerings and the curriculum, so I like that approach.
It's just a thought.
Would it also include, and I'm sorry, it's not my time, would it also include courses that maybe do not exist anymore based on population of courses?
Yes.
Maybe stricken if a class does not exist because kids don't sign up for it in the last 4 years.
That was also something, that's a good point, because that was something we noticed as we were digging into, where's the evidence that these were approved 20 years ago, or gosh, that one is on there, but we don't even have students enrolled in that anymore, so it just got really mucky.
Typing class does not exist anymore.
Typing does not exist anymore. Although some would say that.
Sewing was on there for a while. Yep.
Can I ask the board, when you get a recommendation from Amy, what do you do normally? I mean, how deep do you delve into it? And how much, I'm just wondering.
Are you asking about a course or a book or?
A course.
I think probably this evening will be a good example of that because we have maybe some course approvals proposed this evening. That'll be a good example of how we deal with it. And I think based on the questions we ask of Amy this evening, we might have to have more information in order to move ahead.
And you can imagine some courses are easier to say, if we bring to you an Algebra 2 course that is new, like, okay, that's different than a theology course or something that could be.
To see that.
I know. Well, I'd like to keep a job too, so.
I want to teach that. I want to teach that. How does this relate to that extensive list we saw some time ago of the courses we had no record of being approved?
So that lengthy list is connected to the board policy that we just went over in regard to, once we go through this process, and forgive me, Dr. Vanderjack, I hope I'm going to represent this well, but once we go through an approval process of this board policy and you approve the board policy, then I would bring back that extensive list and of all of the courses. And we would have clarity about what that's defined as, because that's really what this board policy does. And then we would request board approval of that course list.
Yeah.
And any item that did not have a date on it would be whatever that date is. So if that's March whatever, then it would simply say March 13th or whatever the date is that the board approved that course list.
Just giving my limited intelligence, I hope that you'll do it incrementally, not all at one time, so that we can absorb what we're dealing with here.
Okay. So maybe a content
Whatever-
area at a time or
Whatever's a
something?
reasonable amount to bring at one time, because we might have questions. I just want to be swamped with it and have them going through or rejected because we have too much to deal with, so.
We can figure out a way.
Yeah, figure a way
Yeah.
just to drip them into us here.
You got it.
Okay.
It's correct, it's not going to be approve them all, so we have to go.
You would approve them all. So to Mark's point, we would bring to you in groups, probably that you could approve easily, and then probably bring to you ones that you would request greater discussion.
That was a long list, so I agree.
So it's not all at one time.
Yeah.
Some need more attention than others.
Eventually, every one of those boxes should be filled with a date,
Yeah.
or removed as an option for our kids to take.
See if we do sewing class in.
Hey, there's a group that wants to do it.
That's right.
The list is long.
All right, any other questions for Amy? All right, we'll move on to new course proposals.
So what you see in your packet this evening are 3 course proposals, and the lagging timeline on this, based on maybe where it's lagging from the World at War course, is specific to programming that we have been doing around our 5-6 building at Georgetown, and the programming that we want to make sure is consistent for all of our 6th graders on both ends of the district. And so that extensive programming, and in these particular areas, really we wanted to make sure that we had all of the right stakeholders at the table making these decisions. Teachers that have been teaching various courses, when we're looking at growing particular courses for our sixth graders, we wanted that additional time. And so that's why these are coming before you here today. And this still does afford us the time to have proper training, receive all the materials and resources that we would need if these are board approved to prepare for the 23-24 school year. So the first course is STEAM Maze. This is attachment number 1. By way of context, in 2016 and 17, Hudsonville Public Schools started a pilot program of STEAM, which stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, Arts, and Mathematics. And at that time, then the board moved forward with approval in the fall of 2017 and added pre-K through 5th grade STEAM class that's offered as a special on a 4-day rotation with the other specials that we offer. So next year will be the first class of 6th graders who will have had all 6 years of STEAM offered in their elementary experience here in Hudsonville. So they will be 6th graders next year. When we think about really STEAM and all that those courses offer to our students, it's not just the science, technology, engineering, math, and arts, but it's really all the critical thinking skills that we know are really at the crux of how we want to be educating our kids. And so we worked with a group of middle school and elementary teachers who teach classes in this area. A couple of them are here this evening. Thank you for your work. And really kind of started to vision, actually, several months ago about how we might grow our STEAM programming as we move up. And so when we look at this group of students, how can we grow that STEAM programming for our 6th graders, and then the following year for 7th grade, as well as some of the construction that's happening here at the high school, how might we mobilize around some additional spaces that we will have to expand some of our STEAM courses and our Project Lead the Way curriculum even into the high school. And so that's kind of the vision that we're on at this time with offering some extensions of Project Lead the Way, which is the curriculum. So that's PLTW. You see those in both the course proposal Maze as well as Blue. The team, as we came together, going back to STEAM Maze, that's a computer science for innovators and makers course. Really thinking about what students have had experience with and exposure to in the elementary, and how do we grow and expand some of those highly engaging opportunities for them as an elective course in 6th grade at both ends of the district, both at our 5-6 buildings as well as our 6th graders at Riley for next year. When we look at the resources, so the Project Lead the Way is the curriculum. I noticed recently, I looked up some statistics about the use of Project Lead the Way resources, and what they are finding is a very high percentage, 87 to 92% of middle school and high school students report high interest in STEM. 70% believe the Project Lead the Way classes help in other areas they want to study, and that goes back to the critical thinking skills, the hands-on learning, the collaborative nature of those courses, and problem solving in groups and so forth. So lots of opportunity, I think, for us to support our students. U.S. Department of Labor, 10 million workers in STEM occupations in 2021, and they anticipate that that will grow by 11% by 2031. So we want to make sure that we're engaging our students in some of those higher level thinking opportunities in all of our courses, but we know that there's high engagement in the STEAM courses as well. So you'll notice under kind of that connection that we're making this evening between a course and the curriculum, this particular course, because the curriculum has already been identified, because we are currently using Project Lead the Way at the elementary level, we would be then expanding our use of Project Lead the Way into their middle school programming. It's called Gateway, and that would be utilizing the computer science for innovators and makers. And so you'll notice that under the cost section and the number of sections that we would like to offer at each of our buildings where 6th graders will be next year.
So Amy, how does the cost compare to some of the other curriculum that we've introduced recently? I mean, it looks to me pretty reasonable.
It does. In fact, the STEAM maze is even less expensive than STEAM Blue. The automation and robotics is a more costly course. Please note these are startup courses, and I think, Dawn, that's an excellent comparison, because when we're talking about a textbook, often that can be in that $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 a year price point. And when we're talking about this particular curriculum and the training needed for our staff, you can see that for the computer science course, we're at about $13,000, just under. And then for the robotics and animation, due to the items in the Project Lead the Way kit, so the resources that students use to build robots and such, that's more costly, and that's coming in at about $41,000. So very comparable to other textbooks or curriculum resources that we are using. So there's 2 STEAM courses that you can see. One is automation and robotics, and one is computer science for innovators and makers. And again, there's lots of details here, but that's kind of the overarching big ideas of both of those courses that we would like to offer to students next year in 6th grade.
At all 6th grade, you know,
Yes.
yes, yeah.
6th graders at our
Yes,
5-6 building,
yeah.
as well as Riley. Good question, yes.
I'm sure the robotics team person that may not be here, but I have to believe they are like thrilled that students could then go on to this next level, because I'm sure that's going to increase their competitiveness.
Absolutely, and there has been a STEAM class at the middle school offered since it was before I was here, when there was part of the strategic planning was to expand elective offerings in the middle school. But we really believe as a team, middle school staff who've been teaching those courses as well as the elementary teachers, department chairs for STEAM, really believe that this does kind of elevate if we continue on with that level of programming, utilizing these resources and the high level of training that our teachers will get. So it's a very
For the
exciting.
students that participate in Science Olympiad.
Yes,
This is important for that as well.
absolutely.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, this is great to see. I got to be a watchdog myself last month, so I got to sit in your class. Disappointed though.
Good job, Angie.
It was great, and like my brain doesn't think in robotics at all, but I'm like, man, if I had this class, maybe. Because you were showing a video, and I had to leave to go to the next class early. I asked
Start that schedule.
yeah, I'm like, yeah. All right. I asked my son afterwards, I'm like, how did that video end? Because it's showing how robotics work at Amazon and all this stuff. I'm like, yeah, you can teach so many things in this class, so it's cool to see that continuation. And I learned that my son is the first class that's gone all the way up. So he's gonna be 6th grade next year, so this is cool to see.
Amy, go ahead, Jim.
No, go ahead, Greg.
Amy, what are the benchmarks? I mean, do you have benchmarks that you use to tell you whether this is worth carrying on? Have you ever started a STEAM program, it is a program, a STEAM offering, and said, no, this isn't really what we thought it would be? Or is everyone that we piloted or started still going strong?
Still going strong.
Okay, so
Yeah.
you haven't had any less than adequate results from something that was
We have
started?
not.
Okay.
Again, this was started in 2016-17, the pilot, and adopted in the fall
Mhm.
by the board in
Okay.
2017. So lots of success
Uh-huh.
and engagement there, yeah.
Do we know with the ISD, does the ISD offer anything comparable, or are they kind of staying out of this? What's the ISD doing? I'm just curious.
Are you wondering about like the Career Tech Center, those
Yeah, I'm sorry,
opportunities at the
yes,
high
yes.
school level?
Yeah.
I think that they do. Boy, I would have to really look at their catalog to dig into
That's
what
okay.
those
I was just
specific
curious
programs
if-
are.
Yeah.
But I think that they do offer some programming in the area of STEAM at the high school level. And that would certainly be investigation and research we would do as we think about our program growing beyond 6th grade, so.
Yeah, to piggyback on that, I mean, the natural line of thinking would be, okay, well, we're doing this for 6, can we anticipate next year you'll probably come to us with recommendations for 7?
I do, based on how this goes and continued conversation with our teachers and our teams and ensuring that we can continue to grow with it, but that's really the vision. And because of the cost, you can really only grow it one
Yeah.
section at a time, and it seemed like a proper time to do that.
But it makes sense, to your point, to investigate what's already happening
Absolutely.
at the tech center for high school, so we're not doubling up on things that already exist.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think it's great.
Yeah. I think it's a great course. Yeah.
Any other questions?
There's one more.
I have one more, which is called Creative Music. So those were both the STEAM courses. Creative Music is a course that we are looking at. We are requiring all of our sixth grade students on both sides of the district to engage in a music class as a sixth grader this year, which is new. Actually, all of the scheduling has gone very well. We have very high numbers in band and orchestra at this time for the 5-6 building. Numbers as of the end of last week were still coming in for Riley. One of the offerings, though, for students who may not be interested in band, choir, or orchestra, with the change, we felt like we wanted an opportunity to move forward with some type of creative music course for those who might not be interested in the other. And we'll see what all of those final enrollment numbers look like. If the board approves this course, we would like this to be an offering that we do provide for students next school year. You can see that this is year-long course for sixth graders. Again, this would count as one of their music electives. And of varying key topics, so continuing some of their ukulele from elementary, talking about world music, bucket drumming, singing. They do envision that this would be a course where they would have some performances of some sort as well. When we look at state standards around the arts, those are really important skills to also teach kids, is the performance side of things, and so we envision that as well.
Do we have the adequate staff? I mean, to teach singing, you probably have to be different than, I mean, you have to be trained for that, right?
So we do, and this was all part of some of the things that took us so long, if you will, to make some final decisions on programming, because we needed to ensure that we had staff to do all of what we wanted to do, especially in the area of requiring sixth grade music. So we do have staff that are qualified to teach this course. They currently are teaching either elementary music, or they're teaching one of the other choir, band, or orchestra at the middle school level.
This is a semi-serious comment. I'd like to see Mozart as a small section in there.
Okay.
Brilliant. One of the greatest composers ever.
Composers, if you will.
composing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Got music history.
Is it there? Yeah.
Oh, it's one of the key topics. So yeah,
That would be
I
great.
still hopefully.
They'll be able to cover Mozart in that, yes.
It's my limited music knowledge.
Several of my kids are involved in the music industry as their business, and what this would provide to students that their parents would have to pay for if they did this privately is huge. And the advantage to our students to be able to offer something like this is amazing. I think there'll be a lot of districts who would be a little jealous of the fact that we have the ability to do this, so thank you for pursuing it. Great things.
There's a lot of research behind the academic success of students tied
Exactly.
to the fact.
Yeah.
Can I ask what body percussion is?
Body percussion, I think,
Is that just
yeah.
like beatbox?
Yes, I think so.
I was just thinking about like
Kids aren't old enough.
beatbox.
Or you're private.
Yeah, we taught, that was one of the things that the committee talked about, like beatboxing, it's, you know, to get kids interested, yeah.
Got it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
body, yeah.
I think the acapella groups do with that too, because they have no instruments at all.
Got it. Thank you.
All right, moving on to our bus purchase recommendation.
Thank you.
Great.
So, I'll go through the recommendation that we'd like to bring next week at the board meeting, and then I'll go back and add some color to it. So, our ask this year is for 2 of the Thomas Mini Tour, 30 passenger buses, 5 of the Thomas 77 passenger buses, and 1 Safety Liner C2 77 passenger bus from Hopestra Transportation at a cost not to exceed $958,712 plus reasonable associated costs. What we've done for many years is we've asked for well, there is one new bus here. This Thomas Safety Liner, 77 passenger, is also has a wheelchair function added to it. And the first two, the mini tour buses, it's a different chassis than we purchased in the past for our special ed buses. The reason we're asking for this is we're going to so many more, I would say, house stops, where we're actually really need to get off the road and get in the driveway. And the mini tour is just, well, it's lighter, it's got a better turn radius. It's not, the 77 passenger and the normal special ed bus we purchased is just a shorter version. I mean, sometimes I think the shorter buses almost get worse gas mileage. The mileage is the same, it's a tall bus, it's tough for staff to get kids on and off. This mini tour is gaining a lot of popularity. It still meets the Department of Transportation specs for safety. Still a heavy that, I mean, relatively heavy. It's lighter than the normal one, but it's just, it meets a lot of needs that that we're struggling with right now with our current fleet. And the difference between the Thomas Safety Liner C2 77 passenger is right now, many times we have, for special trips, we have to send 2 buses. As I think everybody's heard us talk about over and over again, we don't have enough bus drivers. So it's costing us more. We don't have the bus drivers. And this would allow, if there's a student or a staff member with, that we need to get a wheelchair on the bus for them to go along, it helps us fit that need. It's like a Swiss Army knife bus. And we don't need, I mean, we don't need a ton of them, but just to have one in the fleet gives us a lot of flexibility, will help us reduce our costs. And it'd be really nice in those situations where you'd have to split the class up, or classes up. If they could all go to the event together. There's a lot of teaching that goes on the bus, back and forth, camaraderie. It's been really nice for that reason. In the past, buses get more expensive. So just like everything else, the buses we purchased in the past have not, we think our high before this was like 830,000. So now 8 buses is costing $958,000. Had good experience with Thomas coming out and helping us with warranty work when needed. They're low on every one of these buses except one. The total quote, they're by far the lowest. That's why our recommendation is to go with Thomas for all 8 buses. And Mr. Matthews, our director, and our mechanics have put hours and hours and hours. They started working on this in October. I'm very confident in their work. They talked to us, I mean, they talked to Doug, talked to me about it. We really think this will be good. And nice to see that we're not just doing the same thing over and over again. So, any questions on that?
If you'll recall, one of the important discussions we had as a board, with all due respect to the people that were not here, is the conversation around our the Ottawa County 10-year that was 0.9 mils. We allocated specifically to get our bus fleet back up to date because we were quite a ways behind. So the idea was to order 8 to 10 buses every year, truly for 8 years to get our bus fleet back up. So now when we can, we think it's extremely important to try to, it does reduce maintenance, it does not eliminate maintenance. We still live in a salt-infested Michigan world, but and the team does amazing work. And Pat does an amazing job working with the transportation department. Rob does a great job. The mechanics and the bus drivers are phenomenal. We just want to give them safe buses.
Pat, when we sell these buses, what are they returned to us? I mean,
Virtually nothing.
okay.
I mean, by the time we get rid of a bus, the sheet metal's so bad. I mean, a lot of times we've used them. We've tried to hide hide them as a boneyard back there and not make it really unsightly. But we can get more, we can save more just taking parts off them most of the time, Greg, than it's, if we get the, you know how the sheet metal market's been up and down, but if we get $2,500, that's a lot. And we want it to go way, we prefer the bus to go way, way, way south, out of our country, into other countries, and have our name off it for liability reasons, so,
I see a lot of them in Honduras.
yeah.
Not with our name on it, but
Yeah.
definitely that's where a lot of the buses go and die.
Never know. Keep going there, you might see.
Good question, we get very little from them.
So Pat, the smaller buses, do those, you know if those have air brakes still? Like, do you need a special
Yeah,
endorsement for
they're
those?
gonna, it's gonna require air brake certification.
This is summer science.
Air brakes are costly to an auto question.
Yeah. So the reason I ask is because we have a bus driver shortage, right?
Yes.
Is there a way for teachers or coaches or others or to drive those buses without needing that?
Easier to pass the test without the air brake question.
Yeah, it is a lot easier to pass without air brakes, but
I'm just wondering.
our trainer is doing gym.
Oh, I know, yeah.
People just aren't, he's getting past that.
Sure.
Yeah, usually if they can see themselves doing it, that's the biggest thing.
Right, I'm just wondering would these be available for a coach that, or?
Other uses, yes.
Yes, okay, without the endorsement. Gotcha.
Yeah. I don't know without the endorsement
Okay.
question.
Okay.
Because I think they're still required,
Sure.
but that's why we're using
your
those.
CDL without it anymore.
Yeah.
Right, well, I'm just wondering if your
Even
CDL is
if-
even required for something like this.
I
Think
believe
over
a
8
yes.
passengers.
I believe it's a yes.
We can check.
I'm just curious.
I believe
Maybe
it's a yes.
maybe to get more in the school. I like the one with the air conditioning.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's just, it wasn't that much more, and we need that in the summer for trips, for, especially for our early childhood. We're sending those kids, and there's one situation where this would have eliminated 2 buses. So,
Thank you.
So this is part of the plan, the overarching plan we put in place before?
Yes.
It fits in.
Yes, I think as Dr. Van Dyke said, that was a 18 vote, 2019 was the first levy, so it's ticking.
It's gonna take some time, because I believe the district went about 6 years without purchasing buses.
Oh, yeah.
So it's gonna take us some time, but.
Good, Mike.
Okay.
All right, any other questions for Pat? All right,
Thanks.
construction update.
Yeah, I'll try to be, I don't want to go through this too quick, and I'm not going to show you a lot of pictures. I send you them sometimes on Fridays with some updates on some branding or some construction. Just a quick update. You've seen the connectors open between the 2 buildings. The offices are now occupied. There are 8 classrooms in the connector that will be transitioning the math teachers to those classrooms from the main campus at the high school coming over. There are 2 classrooms upstairs that are considered a large group construction area. There are garage doors that close to make those classrooms. Those are probably delayed till summer. So we are going to put temporary walls up in there just to get the classrooms moved in so we can start some renovations on the west side of the main campus of the high school. At some point, we will stop calling it the high school and the freshman campus. It will be the high school complex. This will be, we start to call things a little bit different. It's called the West Media Center. There'll be an East Media Center. There's a East, I'm sorry, which way am I facing? This is West, that's East. There's a West, Central, and East gym. The East gym, you might recall, is the Aux gym. The West gym will be the freshman gym, which you're kind of used to. The main gym you know of now will be the Central gym, and then there'll be the field house. So we're starting to name them primarily because for athletic reasons, when you have events, you want to make sure that the coaches can tell them where events are taking place. We have 1 address at this building, truly starting now. It won't turn in from next year it turns into a state address, so every building has a code. This building has a different code than that building. They are now connected, so next year there will be 1 building. The freshman campus code disappears. We started this work, quite frankly, a few years ago with 1 principal. That was Jordan Beal, who still is, and that will kind of transition into 1 building. The entrances will still exist, but the entrance on this end will not be the freshman campus entrance. It will be the, this is going to confuse you a little bit, it'll be the north entrance and the athletic administration, because the athletic administration is now down here, along with security. So we've made some changes to the complex of the building. The main office at the high school, if you go by there now, there's nobody in there. It's starting to be demolished. So that is all located down in the main entrance here, working through the bugs on some of the, doors squeak or things like that. So it's kind of fun to watch. The staff has been amazing through this transition. They've officially been in there for 2 weeks now. They're doing great work. We're going to move the math teachers into those classrooms starting today. However, we're fine-tuning some of the locking mechanisms, and safety and security is the most important thing. So we want to make sure those work as desired and as expected prior to moving students into those classrooms. We hope to get that rectified in the next day or two. And I was a former math teacher. Maybe I still am a math teacher at heart. They can move quickly into a classroom. I'll just leave it at that. You tell me. Well, if I grab my book and I'm not chalk anymore, but if I grab my marker, I go down there and be like, let's go. So they're looking forward to moving into the classroom, which will then, it'll liven up the area along the corridor, but it'll also help with transition of kids moving. The connector that goes along currently, which would be the central gym, the connector that's coming along nicely, the roof is on that, for the ceiling. A lot of windows, it's all glass throughout there, which is really nice. All the security film glass, which is great, but that will be opened up over the summer. So that'll be good for next school year. The field house itself, they're going to start pouring the floor of the field house, which is coming along nicely. We're delayed a little bit, as you all probably know, based on some of the challenges with the design initially. But we're not getting back on schedule, but we're getting back on a schedule. So we'll get that opened up for the kids. We're trying to figure out when is the first event in that facility, and we'll keep you posted what that looks like. So that's fairly exciting. The 5-6 buildings coming along nicely. We believe that's in real good shape. We feel like it'll be completely occupied by July, but we need to get our staff in there in June or the end of May. So they're working right now. It's all enclosed. Ceilings are starting to go in, paint's up. Technology is going to start going in. It's going to look, it'll need to be fine-tuned, but it's coming along very nicely. There's some work still on landscaping and so forth, but it's hard to do right now because you can imagine it's snowing. But that'll come nicely. We would like to have, and we're meeting next Tuesday to discuss more of an open house format for the 5-6 building. We would like parents to get into the building, regardless of whether or not your kids are going to go there. And figure out how we can do that in more of an open house format, whether we do it in shifts. We still got to talk about hard hats and vests and those kind of things, but we have some ideas for how we can get a large majority of parents that want to see it into the facility well before we take occupancy and go from there. So I'll keep the board updated on what that timeline looks like. We want to make sure that it's still safe and looks nice, but there's not going to be carpet in it yet. There's not going to be maybe all the electricity will be wired and stuff, but it'll look really nice. That's our plan with 5-6 building.
Hey, go like a tent up there from one in the floor so she can hang out.
Yeah. Her office is there. She doesn't have windows in her office. It's pretty cold in her office right now. B.O.W.R, the bids are in, so the construction will start on B.O.W.R this coming summer. To extend, we're working right now and figuring out the portable situation. The portables at Georgetown Elementary are not in the way. The portables at B.O.W.R are in the way. So we have to move them. We're doing some work on Park Elementary, and we've talked about how much of a heavy lift Park is going to be. It's going to be a heavy lift. So we're trying to, the transition is going to be hard. We had one point it talked about, because we're redoing the middle hallway. You have kids on both ends, right? So we had talked about shutting down the north end of the hallway, working on the south, shutting down the south end. But the way the electrical and the plumbing works in that building, it's all right down the middle. So we might have to build a separate temporary hallway and do some portables outside, which we do have new portables. We just might have to shut that whole central hallway down, which will speed the project up a lot, but it will inconvenience the building for a while. Obviously, safety and security is of utmost importance. Kids will be the easy part. They'll be like, where do I go? But we want to keep the kids, figure out what's the best way to do this. We're batting around some ideas. We meet again next week to try to see what other options we have out there. Ideally, we'd like to take the 4 portables, 2 at Bauer, 2 at Georgetown, move them over to Park, but we might be 1 short. So we're trying to figure out if we can maybe put a bus in there. That could be the teacher's lounge. First, I don't figure, don't share that. We're not making a bus at teachers. Anyway, so that's kind of where we are with the Park situation. The bids do go out on Park, and you know the Bauer bids came back positive, so we're looking for the same thing with Park Elementary.
What's the timeline on Park?
2025, if we can do it in 1 phase. If not, we'll be closer to the 26. Yeah.
Problem on this one.
Yeah, I know.
I was there when they did the first, before they had the hallway.
Oh. Yeah.
Interesting to watch.
Yeah, it was fun to watch. The next phase, and really mostly the last phase, is ECC. So we can't touch the Early Childhood Center. If you recollect, we were trying to add 4 more additional classrooms to the Early Childhood Center. To do that, we need wrestling to be out of that facility. Wrestling can't get out of that facility until the field house is completed. So the wrestling component of the field house, we hope to have done by the start of next wrestling season. But they still wrestle in the fall, they wrestle in the summer. So we're going to start the design phase for ECC. It's not a major construction project, but it does add some additional classrooms. It works on the cafeteria. And a lot of that we've had to wait on just because of the cost of things, to make sure that we have the money to do what we, to do it to the level we have to. We have a couple other projects that we plan on doing, but we're waiting to see what we committed to in our bond before we do them. So if you recall, we looked at a storage shed. We're kind of waiting on that to make sure. Right now, everything looks great. There might be some other options. The board might say, hey, what about this? We have this much left. But from a conservative standpoint, we want to make sure we get through what our voters expected us to get through before we dive into anything else.
Are we pushing the envelope on the ECC as far as the amount of people? Like, is there a waiting list, or are we able to accommodate anyone that wants to come to the ECC right now?
I don't know the answer to that question. I do know that the way the ECC is designed when it comes to student enrollment, you have phases of kids, and right now we have teachers that don't share classrooms, and it might be open every other day, or it's open in the afternoon. So we could probably do some creative scheduling if we needed more room. What we're trying to do is build a facility that can add programming but still give them their own classroom. We've added GSRP, we have sections that are there. We've been able to expand those without a problem. We're trying to keep our pre-K kids in their home buildings, and it's hard. You know, you look at Georgetown, you look at Park, it's hard to keep them in their home building. Forest Grove is another one. So we think with some of this expansion of the 5-6 building, we can actually add a section or 2 back to their home building, which will alleviate some room at the PCC, which then allows that to continue to expand. It's tough a little bit, and we've had some of these conversations as a board. For future projects, it might be in the best interest of the district to look at potential of multiple ECC buildings. It's centrally located, which is ideal. But if you live at Bauer or you live south of Forest Grove, it's still a hike to get to there, and you're little. Whether your parent drops you off or not, you're still little, getting in the car or getting in the bus for an extended period of time. If we can look at maybe on that Georgetown campus and maybe the Jamestown campus to start to see, maybe we went smaller. Now you've got centrally located. You keep your kids, truly you keep your kids on the north and south until they're in 8th grade, and then you bring them to the middle of the district. That might be something to think about, but that's a long-term discussion, and we're years away from, at least a couple years away from having that growth discussion.
Dr. Vanderjack, this proposal for universal pre-K, I mean, I know it's early. How many kids would that affect, and where would we put them?
Yeah, I think we have room for them to be. I mean, we have probably 300 to 400 kids that are already in pre-K.
Okay.
So, you know, and it's still, universal pre-K is still, it can be parents can opt their child out from doing it. I want to keep them home and do it. Do I think all of the population of our parents would do it? I don't know, but I think we have the facilities to do it. I think the addition to the conversation that we're gonna have about the construction at ECC will open up some avenues, and I do think when we open the 5-6 building, you're opening multiple classrooms at elementary buildings. That allows us to bring them back there. I think long-term, we're in really good shape if that were to come to fruition.
We
Good
have
question.
about 47% of our students who attend ECC filter into our kindergarten programs at this time, just as a, for the sake of,
That idea of decentralizing ECC, I mean, you think about Jennison's ECC, I'm sure we lose a lot of kids up there to that ECC, right? There's more than suburbs. There's more than here, it's right, there's smiling.
Well, I don't, it's right on the
I
border
should
of
say, I'm
Hudsonville,
sure,
so I don't
yeah,
know.
so, because it's right there, right? And then once they get into the early childhood center, then you're just kind of continuing on through school, right, Jennison. So that's a, you know, we talk about that's an intriguing idea to decentralize. I know it's a future state.
Yeah, I think if you live, and I'll give an example, if you look around Georgetown and you live in that area and there's an early childhood center right there that then was going to lead to an elementary building right there, that's then going to lead to a 5-6 building, then to a 7-8 building, it's a little bit different. Then you gotta go to ECC, and then you gotta go up back to, I mean, just some ideas that we'd like to bring to the board when the time is. Questions on construction? I know that's a 10,000 foot view, but I want to keep you updated, particularly on timelines. And I think the field house we're looking at delayed. I think the 5-6. Well, let me just say this: we're getting in the 5-6 building by the time school starts. Even in fact, run extension cords from that. We're going to do it.
Involved in staff would be very, very happy.
Yes, we're getting.
So subs and contractors are not, contractors are not seeing labor issues to the extent that we're slowing things. I'm sure they're seeing labor issues,
Yeah.
but not to the extent that things are getting slowed down.
Yeah, we did have to have some meetings to help expedite some work that was taking place. And I am optimistic that, I don't know how to answer this other than, yes, there's some challenges, but we're pushing back and we're getting a response. We've had some heavy meetings, but we're getting there.
Any other questions for construction for Dr. Anderson? Next up is superintendent goals review.
Yeah, so I just want to share, if I can, I know we have a couple new board members, but at the beginning of traditionally at the beginning of the school year, there are goals that are established that are primary, and it doesn't mean that's the only things we work on as a district. That doesn't mean those are the only things that I work on as a superintendent, but I want to share the document so you have the document in front of you. These are the goals for the 2022-23 school year. And I just want to quick go through them, and you can ask questions now, you can ask them later, you can call me, either one's fine. The first goal was the track measures and academic achievements and growth of HBS elementary and secondary students. And if you, I did provide you, and I'd like to continue to do this at our work sessions, a snapshot. I gave this to you, and this is something that I'm not saying it has to be a heavy discussion. I like it if you would take it with you and keep it. And if somebody has questions in the community, you're like, you know what, before I address this, let me look at this. If it's not on here and you think it is something that should be on here, please let me know. There are some things that are easier than others to put on. There are some things that are very static that aren't going to change because we don't test every month on the M step. We test once a year. If you look at the bottom left-hand corner, I do want to thank Stephanie in putting this in a beautiful format, but she's also updated the bottom left, which is student demographics. So the idea is updating that on a monthly basis so that you can see those numbers as they evolve. They don't change drastically, but it's also nice to get a snapshot of what it looks like. Some of those other scores you can see don't change until results come back from the state, but I would encourage you that as one of my goals, I think it's important for you to at least have facts on what the district dynamics look like. Mike, go ahead.
Can we ask questions?
Sure.
On this? Bottom right, the student mental health side, how are we assessing that and how often?
Yeah, so we surveyed our students. Last time we did it was November. And so that's the results that we use. That might be something, depends on how it evolves, how often we survey our kids, but those are things. And not every, it's not required. Some kids don't fill it out. Some families do not want their kid, which is perfectly fine. We just want to provide the information that we have on that.
Yeah, I mean, this is an important thing to be, and I think, one of the counselors spoke at the last board meeting about the need for service this year. So when we see some of those numbers, I mean, there's a lot of work to do. So I think at some point we should further discuss, what we can do to help. So there's some big numbers. It's not surprising, unfortunately, to see numbers like that. The world's not getting easier, so.
Yep, I think there are a lot of ideas that we have to try to support I mean, we're not going to get that number down to zero, and sometimes it's not a matter of people that can do it. I think we had some conversations about the volume of counselors to student ratio. We are substantially lower than the state. Now, I will tell you, the state average in counseling to student ratio, I think, is the third highest. Michigan might be the third highest in the country. Ours is about half of what the Michigan average is. So if you look at the Hudsonville student to counselor ratio, it is probably the top 10 if you average it compared to a state average. But there's a lot more metrics than that. Our counselors are, when I went to school, a counselor was a guidance counselor. How would I change my schedule? Can you help me fill out a job application? I think our counselors would love to sit down and say, hey, here's how you fill out a job application to Wendy's. It's not like that anymore. Kids are struggling and they need adults. And we put a lot of adults in front of our kids all across the board. I think that's why the importance of the PBIS people, the MTSS specialists that can help work on data. We have additional supports at our secondary buildings and our elementary buildings. I don't think we're done. I don't know if the federal government is done funding it, but those are tough discussions we're going to have.
Yeah, this is not meant to be a criticism of what we're already doing. It's just, when you look at the numbers, there's a lot of work.
There's still work to do.
Absolutely important stuff. So. Good point.
I know, Dr. Majek, I mentioned this before, the numbers are a little high on here for the mental health. And we have put a lot of resources. We've hired PBIS specialists. We've done a lot. Have we looked at any programs? And I'm just going to bring up Be Nice. I've brought it up before.
Yep.
To where Be Nice is evidence-based, K through 12. Many districts have had good results with it. It focuses on suicide, bullying. I'm a little concerned with a couple of these numbers.
Yeah, and I don't know. I can tell you we've looked at that. Christy Buck and I have had many conversations about Be Nice ones. I've talked to, obviously, Mr. Barrett and myself are very close at Granville. That's where it kind of started. So we have a lot of conversations about it. We also have, we have a Renaissance program here, and how does that, is it a parallel or is it different? Is it a change? All of those conversations. Do I think, if there was a silver bullet, let's buy it, let's do it. Right? I think we need to keep exploring and say what are the next things that, and unfortunately we might have to look at programs and say let's give this a shot, and then it might be, there's something else that's out there now that's new and better. And we have the same conversations with any kind of curriculum. It's like, you've adopted it, we appreciate your support, but guess what? We just did this, and 2 years later there's something better.
Where does this add on the priority list? Because this is something that impacts all students, and we have resources and we work on other things. I look at the diversity committee and how something like this could maybe fit into that. I mean, where are we at? I mean, it's such an urgent need. And we heard that from Becky Dawson at the school board meeting. And
I think it takes time, and that's the tough part about when you're starting these things. How long have we had MTSS and PBIS? I mean, it's not been that long to, I think, affect these numbers drastically, at least based on the time we've been doing them. But that is always the question, right? I mean, if you create a program, you're not necessarily going to immediately fix it and say, okay, now we lower these numbers in 1 year to 20%. I mean, I don't, like you said, Nick, I think our world is such that it's increasingly more difficult. So how can we continue to utilize what we're doing, but then investigate some additional opportunities and keep building on that? But I think it's going to take a couple of years for us to really see the impact of what we're doing now. And that's what's difficult when you're trying to explain to your community how much you're spending and what programs you're trying to implement, that it's not a quick fix. And it takes some time.
Yeah, and I would argue that it's probably one of the highest priorities. I mean, school safety is of utmost priority, and this falls right in line with that, right? And to do that, I think we put a lot of measures in place. I don't know what these numbers would look like if we didn't. So I do believe we're doing some amazing work. I think our staff is connecting with our kids more than they ever have in the past. We've added additional security support so that we can go through and have a presence in the building, and not just from what we consider security, but more of a connection with kids. It's one more adult to connect with kids. Right, so we've done a lot of those. We've done a lot of those measures, and I don't know what these numbers would look like if we didn't. They're still high, and that's why we're going to keep working, and we'll keep bringing back ideas to say, okay, it'd be nice the program that we as a district would like to explore, maybe. So.
And when do we anticipate another survey that would sort of then, if this was November, you know, obviously it'd be nice to see something in the spring again that says, okay, basically again, the same kind of question.
Yep.
How are things looking?
Yeah, we do plan to do a spring administration. This fall was a little different in that it was anonymous this time. So in previous administrations of the survey, there were some questions specific to self-harm so that counselors could have an immediate intervention. We know that we do have invested a lot of time too with our spectrum health, or not spectrum health, but core well, thank you. Blue Envelope project to build awareness around those. So there's definitely an awareness that that's something that we need to stay in touch with our student population. I will say that the survey is 6 through 12, right? And there's an opportunity for families to opt out of that. Even if a family hasn't opted out, if the student chooses not to participate, no one's forcing. So that does affect kind of what our participation rate was. But one of the things that was interesting too is just to look at the intersection between these percentages and what grade levels that happens at the highest frequency, as well as the overlap between sleep and social media use. And so we are having conversations about how do we help close that communication with students so that they also understand how those things impact your mental health as well as strategies too. So at this point, that we haven't come together around an SEL selection for 612. That conversation has primarily been elementary, but that doesn't close the opportunity to talk to kids about what our data is telling us, and what we hope to talk to them about what are their resources if they're feeling this way.
Was there any question regarding bullying on that survey? Like for students to indicate that they feel bullied?
I have to look to verify that, but I can look back if you want to.
I'd be interested.
Yeah.
So I will throw this out also. In our S.O.A.R 5 survey that goes to students, there are some questions, and that we can always add into that also. We want to be cautious of survey overload with our parents and our students and so forth, but we want to, that gives us a sense of, you know, is it, I mean, because bullying was a huge topic several years ago, and then it's kind of part of what we do. You know, we don't tolerate bullying. I mean, we do in some settings, but we don't in classrooms, right? So we're trying to figure out how to address those questions through that survey, as well as the kind of the mental health.
Whether it's on the mental health or the S.O.A.R, I would be interested in data on if someone feels bullied.
Yep.
And I would say too, you get on it, test fatigue. I probably would caution against repeatedly asking them throughout a year, especially on a topic like this, because if even just one student feels like they're being asked over and over and they're still reporting the same things, it can almost leave a sense of like helplessness. Like they're not providing supports for me, and it can spiral. So I would be cautious about how often we're testing this, and if we are, if we then have an intervention or something that we're doing to address whatever area, then it'd probably be more appropriate to ask again. Want to be really sensitive to that.
Yeah, I think that this being our first administration without making sure that they had that resource at the end of the survey too, to know, please reach out to these people if you want to connect further on any of these things. But I do think that that was certainly a big advantage of being able to collect student information so that we can have that just-in-time response. But just trying to navigate the program.
And I always look at it holistically too, like, don't feel like we're trying to plug holes or things like that, but like, again, take a 10,000-foot view and say, all of these things that we're doing, how do they all work together?
Yeah.
So that it's comprehensive and then we can analyze it a lot better than all these little bits and pieces. So they all work together, basically. That's important stuff.
Just following up on what Nick said, I remember a few years ago, I was in a large facility with 1,000, 1,200 employees, and I had the psychologist come up to me and say, I'd like to speak to the people about sun deprivation. And I said to her, do you have a cure? And she said, no. And I said, well, then I want you to do that because some people don't know they're sun deprived. And I say that kind of tongue in cheek, but if, like Nick said, if we keep on asking the questions and they're not seeing us being able to respond to that, and also, Mandy, when you say there's a number of people, of kids who don't take part in the surveys, what percentage of our students don't take part? Do we know?
We do know, but I don't know that
Okay.
offhand. I'm certainly happy to look back with you on that.
Okay. Because you may have, a lot of them saying, and is this 41% based on those who take it, or based on the whole student population?
Take it.
We take it.
Okay. So if you have 200 kids who
There's
don't
enough
take it-
volume to be statistically relevant.
Okay.
It's probably pretty representative.
But, also to pick up on Nick's point, these pieces that come, and it's a puzzle, and it's a complex puzzle. I mean, you're just looking at Granville's site, looks like they run Be Nice and they run an SEO program. Just on their site, they talk about both. And so obviously there's still, for that one silver bullet, everybody would have found it by now. There's not. Everybody's exploring different options and putting different pieces together. And,
But moving back, Barb, the Be Nice program, we've had a lot of conversations about, and that's certainly something that we continue to have now. The next two goals, I'll go kind of quick. We talked extensively about book guidelines. All of that is on our website. We've adjusted as needed, and you can find that information. I think that, not to say that goal is accomplished and we are done, but it continues to evolve. We want to make sure we continue that. I think our systems that we have in place are substantial compared to what they were a year ago. And we've done a lot of work on that, but I'm not saying we're completely done with that. That's moving along nicely. And then hopefully the last one, you could see, as you've got an update on construction, that's kind of where we are with the construction update.
On time, what budget?
I'm working on it. On a time, I should have put it on that.
Yeah.
That's good.
Any questions for the board?
Can I keep going? I'm going to try to go quick with the next items. We talked about So the next one is, this topic came up at one point, and I don't know where, so I apologize. But the discussion was with the, traditionally, the Board of Education has the Vice President serve on the Hudsonville Education, right at you, Nick. Sorry. The Hudsonville Education Foundation, the Vice President serves on capacity in that role. The question came up, does it have to be the Vice President? We have other committees that the board will serve on, and there's kind of, somebody says, you know what, I'll do it this year. Does it have to be the Vice President? I would like the board to quick have a discussion. Does it have, if it has to be the Vice President, I don't think you get to vote, Nick, but if not, is there somebody like, you know what, I wouldn't mind serving on the HEF board. I would ask, based on the time commitment, that Dr. Hooper does not serve on the HEF board, because it's hard to do the presidency and serve on the board, the HEF board. I think Janessa is, Janessa's over here. So just an opportunity. They meet once a month. Janessa does a phenomenal job as an executive director, providing not only information, but seeking feedback. I do think it's important for a board member to serve on the HEF board. You don't have to really say much. You're not a voting member. You're there to listen to see how the impact of the foundation truly is touching the lives of our kids in the classroom. Mr. Davis has been on it for years.
Yeah, I'm the Vice President.
Vice President, you were on it. Dr. Hooper's been on it. Yeah, so this is the first time that we might let the vice president off the hook, but if there's somebody out there, I know Mr. DeWitt was on the HEF board before he got on this board, and then the time commitment was a lot. So I'm throwing it out for discussion. If not, Nick, you're on.
The bylaws for the Hudsonville Education Foundation do not require that it be the vice president. I asked after I was elected president, just so that I would know. They meet Thursday mornings once a month from 7 to 8. Janessa does a fabulous job running the agenda. We are done by 8. It's a great group of people, and I will say that if you want to have a feel-good meeting, that's one to attend, because they do a lot of wonderful, wonderful things. And it's really a great meeting.
Who doesn't like a feel-good meeting?
It's a feel-good meeting. It's actually a feel-good meeting. They do a lot of fabulous things.
I would ask for consistency, though, that
Yeah,
it's
it needs
one
to be the
person.
same person.
Yeah.
At least for the
Know
year. It
people
doesn't
on
have to
the
be.
board
And
yeah.
if you have a conflict for a month,
Yeah.
it might be like, hey, can somebody sit in?
Yeah.
From a practical standpoint, it's also having served on that board for a bit. It's a way to build connections amongst other community members, so it's a good way for that as well.
I'm more than willing to do it. I mean, I've heard great things, but I am more than happy to, you all have previous experience that you would bring to the table there as well, which I'm sure would be great. So, I mean, it would not offend me in the least if anybody else is interested.
Well, one of the things that I talked to Dr. Vanderjack about was, everybody is able to say, well, I've got, all my kids, my grandparents, everybody went to the schools. And I don't have that background to the schools. So I would be willing to serve in that capacity. If the board desires, I think that would be a good way for me to try to, get to know more people.
Do we vote on this?
You don't.
No,
But
we don't.
We can discuss offline.
If nobody cares and Greg's willing to do it, you can arm wrestle for it. But I think it's to the point, if you're willing to do it and the board's like, okay, it'd be nice to, Janessa does an amazing job providing feedback to all of us, and I usually update the board, so you don't have to update the board. But it's nice to have, if the HEF has something they want to bring to the board, it's nice to have that connection to say, yep, I was at the meeting when they discussed this and so forth.
I'd like to see you arm wrestle for it.
I have to be the one arm wrestling. Gladly giving it to Mr. Chansey here.
Okay?
Who's Janessa?
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 Hi, Janessa.
Hi.
Janessa, you don't get a vote, so.
All right, so
All right.
Mr. Chansky, you will represent the board on the Hudsonville Education Foundation.
Thank you.
Dr. Vanderjack, keep us
So
moving.
there's a S.O.A.R 4 update. Traditionally, we give a S.O.A.R 4 update in December and then in June. We waited because of the timing. I'm going to quickly go through a couple highlights on some goals, just so that you understand we continue to work on our S.O.A.R 4 goals. I don't know, I'm throwing my team under not just a bus, but a potential moving bus right now by saying, here's some ideas. I'm going to start with human resources, because Mrs. Armstrong is not able to be here tonight. Just a couple highlights on some goals. I will say 2 of the main goals that we've spent a lot of time on are identifying staffing needs regarding secondary and elementary schedules, and that has a lot to do with the 5-6 building. So you can imagine how much work has gone into that goal, and I would say that goal is accomplished. You'll know that August 22 when school starts, the 5-6 building, the staffing wise, and also identify staffing needs for future buildings. She's done an amazing job on that. There's other areas about staff mental health. You recall that Angie Briggs Johnson was working as a COVID coordinator, which transitioned into a mental health coordinator. All the discussions about mental health when it comes to students, I would say, is parallel to what our staff is dealing with at this point. So she's done a phenomenal job, and that's helping from a district-wide wellness capacity. We have another component of that we explored. Ann and I met. We talked over the weekend about another opportunity for staff mental health, working through that. Communication with the district, a lot of communication. They now have a staff newsletter that goes out. We call it S.O.A.R. That's the program that runs it. That goes through a lot of avenues for that. And then the additional staff was one of the goals with MTSS coordination throughout the district. When we wrote S.O.A.R 4, we did not anticipate the federal funding for this. So this goal was, while it was going to be an ongoing goal, to get there, we allowed to move it to a short-term goal because of the support of the board and the financial assistance from the federal government. We will have to have discussions when that funding runs out of how to streamline and continue to do that important work for our kids moving forward. So that's a quick update on 2, 4, 5 of the goals, 6 of the goals with human resources. I'll ask Mandy if she has anything quick with her goals she wants to say. That look in your face says no.
No,
but,
yeah.
Okay.
We expanded our PBIS group to include 2 middle school positions. Those 2 individuals are doing a lot and covering a lot of ground. I don't know if that's supposed to be. Okay, so they're doing a great job. In special education, one of the statistics on your dashboard is we do service over 900 students. That number is inclusive of students that also attend non-public schools within our Hudsonville boundaries that are eligible for related services like speech or TPT. So probably our K-12 just in-district percentage is probably closer to 11% of our student population receives special education services. The statistic is just inclusive of those outside of our programs. One of the things we're talking about is instructional practices. We were happy to receive a grant through the Michigan Department of Education that supports dyslexia education. So that would provide some of our special education teachers with Ford-Gillingham training, which is a method that's shown to be highly effective with those that either have dyslexia or have similar reading aptitudes. So we're excited for those educators to go through that training and bring some new learning into our department.
Perfect, thank you. You know, I skipped over curriculum. That was the first one. It's on the first page, so go ahead.
Good, yeah. So I would just like to give a brief update. When I look at my goals, they're short-term, long-term, and ongoing goals. And actually, when I was looking at the update, we have an opportunity that we provide around professional development each year, and it's called Eagle U, where teachers actually get to choose the sessions that they would like to go to. And so it actually covers some short-term, long-term, and ongoing goals, if you will, when we look at putting those opportunities together for teachers to choose. The other interesting thing about Eagle U is that teachers often are the presenters as well as administrators. So in a district like ours, we have a lot of wealth of knowledge and highly qualified teachers who teach every day in their classroom using evidence-based best practices, and so it provides an opportunity for them to highlight the things that they are doing and seeing great outcomes around. One area is around instructional technology, so that's a short-term goal. We know that was really sped up because of COVID, but there are sessions offered. It was high school a couple of weeks ago, and then middle school and elementary will have an Eagle U session on February 24th. Yes, and we actually will come back and give you more details at the work session on February 27th. But instructional technology, professional learning communities sessions, that's also a goal under strategic planning, is growing our capacity of professional learning communities. Also around formative and summative assessment, so how we're using assessment data, there's sessions around assessment. And then there's also just sessions that teachers can use talking about high levels of engagement and ensuring that we're using those evidence-based best practices instructionally, whether I'm teaching biology or first grade or middle school science. So that covers a lot of the strategic planning goals.
With co-curricular goals, we had a couple, many things that I've been working on. Rebecca Fabiano has done an amazing job. A lot of our co-curricular, some extracurricular. The addition of the assistant athletic director has really expanded the support at the middle school level, which is great. We had an extensive conversation about intramural program and how we can bring that back. I think it's been 10 or 15 years since Hudsonville's had an extensive intramural program, so we're starting to explore those discussions to get more kids involved. And then just the all-weather space as an ongoing goal, that when the field house opens, we'll not check that box, but help that box to say, now we have a lot more areas. You know, we'll have indoor tennis court, and I'm sure we'll have discussions about how to convert something into a pickleball facility at some point, but go from there. And then under finance and operations, this is Pat's thing, but I'm stealing it for him since I have the copy in front of me. Incorporated a district-wide radio system, which includes transportation. So now communication between buildings from a radio standpoint is much more feasible. We have 800 megahertz now also that can communicate directly with Michigan State Police, which has been helpful. And then increase of both small and large group instruction spaces. With the high school connector, if you remember walking through there, there was a small group instruction with the upstairs, which I talked about with the garage doors. There's a large group instruction area. So that'll really help from this facility for professional development and other needs that the district may have. And then last but not least, maybe one of the largest undertakings that Hudsonville has had to go through is the human resource payroll finance software and the transition of units, which under Pat's direction, a lot of support from Ann Armstrong and her staff. It's a major undertaking, and they, I don't know how many hours of professional development they have, but too many. So, just a quick update on where we are with S.O.A.R. We're not done. When we get to midway through the year, we'll have another update. And then at the end of the year, we'll be able to not just close it out and say, okay, here are things that we'd like to roll over. Here are things that are incorporated into the new strategic plan that will come from a lot of focus groups, survey data, and board involvement with the strategic plan moving forward. So just a quick update.
Yeah, what's the target date on the new software?
On which?
Software.
Well, so I say I wish because there's a number of different packages.
Okay.
We went live on accounts payable and general ledger in July.
Okay.
Our original plan was to go live on payroll January 1, and because we were doing so much with it on the HR side, there weren't enough hours. We added 7 full days in December and November, and it just wasn't ready. So we're still paralleling. We could go live by the end of February, but that's just with payroll. The HR suite will continue to be built out, I'd say, for another 8 months before it's the complete onboarding to offboarding till everything's built in. But yeah, it's a little bit. I would say it's a little self-inflicted. If we just would have done the like payroll strictly, it would have been live. But the things that Ann and her HR group were really working on is just getting all the different personnel action forms and processes built in, and it's coming. But it's been hard.
Mandy, have we seen a big uptick in your time here in percent of kids with IEPs? Would you say? Just go over.
Yeah, I would say that I think when I started, it was closer to 10%, and I think we're maybe 11.5. So I would say from the feel is that we have changed in the diversity of the ways in which kids are eligible. So I think historically the largest population was students that were identified as having learning disabilities, but today it's so much more varied with a higher percentage in autism, emotional impairments, kind of doing that. So the number may be a smaller shift, but the range of diversity of learners has changed.
S.O.A.R. 5. So I just, in your packet, you can read through it. Those are the sample letters that are going out. Any questions? Sorry. I just want to make you aware. And we talked about it last meeting, but then the information is there if you want to look and just see what the letters go out, not only to the business leaders and clergy, but then there's a letter that goes out to the random parents that has the dates for the focus groups. We have the dates set also for the other focus groups for the staff and the students and so forth. So we'll get that moving. I think the first focus group meeting starts February 20, so in about just over 3 weeks from tonight. 3 weeks from tonight.
Dr. Banjic, do you run all those focus groups?
I
or
do.
Have someone let me know?
I do. We do have somebody that helps collect the data, but that's only after the board has completed what they want to be collected. Nobody creates the questions. Well, let me rephrase that. We use a lot of similar questions, and if we need somebody to say, hey, listen, here's what we're trying to ask. Somebody might wordsmith it, but the board will have final approval on the survey that goes out to our community, our students, and our staff. Okay, so the last one is, and I apologize, I did not bring this to the board last meeting. We have a policy change that does not require board action, which is the first. Melissa Bernard is a Title IX coordinator along with Mike Petrolia. Mike's office is at the high school. Melissa is now at the high school. So board policy is going to change only by address only. So Melissa was at Riley Middle School. There are 6 policies that include the address for the Title IX coordinator. We have to make those changes, and it does not require board action. But I wanted you to understand that I'm not trying to change 6 policies without you knowing. I just want to let you know that we have to have it updated on our website and on our policy manual as soon as possible, so that that will take place.
Any questions for Dr. Vanderjagt? All right, we'll do a quick board roundtable. We'll start with Mr. Davis.
I'm all set. Thanks.
All good?
Thank you to Dr. Vanderjagt, the administrative team, the teaching staff that's here tonight. An outstanding job in this district. I know there have been concerns expressed. I respect those concerns that the district has problems off track. I don't see it. I mean, the data points to a strong district that continues to perform extremely well. Our focus is looking forward in terms of how we beat Grosse Pointe. We're looking forward, and so thank you all of you for the great, outstanding job that you do every single day. That's it.
Good.
Mr. Chancellor?
I just have a couple of questions, Dr. Vanderjagt. You alluded to the fact that there's some programs that we have that are dependent on state funding that will be running out. We probably also have some on federal funding that will be running out. Is there any way for us to get a report which tells us when funding is going to, this extra funding is going to go away, and then what type of, what are we going to do to either let those programs go or take money from somewhere else and divert that into the program?
Sure. Yeah, we can definitely do that. I know the board has received information regarding the S.O.A.R funds, S.O.A.R 1, 2, and 3, when those expire, what they're allocated for.
Mhm.
We have 31AA, we have 31A, we have 31Q, we have 11T, all those different funds. We can talk about when they expire and what that looks like. And our goal has always been to work with our legislators to ask for as much extension as possible to use these funds. But we have been actively using them, and I will say that I'm optimistic that we will then there'll be some tough decisions about where we take operational dollars, if they're available, to continue the support and find out where the priorities in the district. But absolutely.
Thank you.
I think there was a presentation that was done by S.O.A.R prior to that perhaps someone could get to you that might give you some of that information.
Sure, okay. Does someone have that presentation? Do they know if they have it?
We can get it from
Okay.
Andy.
You can get it to me, I appreciate it.
Okay, and I just want to say thank you to my fellow board members. It is January and it's School Board Appreciation Month, and I know that you all work very hard. I know I appreciate everything that you do, and I appreciate you for supporting me in this new role. So thank you. With that, we will take a motion to adjourn.
I'll move that.
Motion by Mark Davis, second by Andrew DeWitt. All in favor say yes.
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 We are adjourned.
So, Barb and Don, that's what you.
Yeah.